A man became fed up with his neighbors using his pool without permission, and what he did next shocked everyone. After enduring weeks of annoyance, he devised the perfect plan for revenge, and his daring act became the talk of the neighborhood. "Do they seriously believe I've turned my home into a public pool?" Tom grumbled, leaning his head against the kitchen window. Clutching his coffee mug tightly, he glared at the Mendez family, who were once again hosting an unauthorized pool party in his backyard. It was a Saturday afternoon, and while most people were out enjoying their weekend, Tom had just returned from a particularly stressful week at the accounting firm where he worked. All he wanted was some peace and quiet, maybe a lazy afternoon by the pool. Instead, Miguel Mendez and his loud, carefree friends were sprawled out on his patio furniture, lounging by the water without a care in the world. It hadn't always been like this. Tom, a 42-year-old who had lived alone since his divorce 5 years ago, had been thrilled when he first bought the house in this quiet, middle-class suburban neighborhood. It was his dream home: the wide backyard, the shade of a large oak tree in one corner, and most importantly, the sparkling blue pool. That pool had been his solace during long summer days, a place where he could unwind and leave the worries of his work behind. At first, his new neighbors had seemed friendly. The Mendez family, in particular, seemed to embody suburban courtesy and good manners. Miguel, a salesman in his mid-40s with a confident smile and a laid-back charm, had been the first to greet Tom when he moved in. "Welcome to the neighborhood. You've got a great place here," Miguel had said warmly. At the time, Tom hadn't given the interaction much thought. He wasn't looking for close friendships, just a little peace and quiet after years of living in cramped apartments. But it wasn't long before Miguel's compliments turned into something else. First, it was the kids. Teenagers from the neighborhood who would hop the low fence around his property when he wasn't home, sneaking quick swims while Tom was at work. Then it was Miguel and his friends, who started showing up with 6-packs of beer, acting like they were doing Tom a favor by breaking in the pool for him. Miguel would always shrug off any complaint with a smile, saying, "Come on, man, what's the big deal? It's just a pool. We're neighbors." But to Tom, it was a big deal. The pool symbolized his dedication and hard-earned success, a private refuge that was being repeatedly violated. Initially, he approached the matter courteously, suggesting they could use the pool if they simply asked for permission beforehand. However, his efforts were met with apathy. In fact, the situation only seemed to escalate. Nearly every weekend, he would come back to find Miguel, his wife Linda, and a crowd of neighbors treating his pool as though it were theirs. "Tom, you've got to stop letting them walk all over you like this," his co-worker Jack said one day during lunch, after Tom had vented about his neighbors yet again. Jack, a brash and outspoken guy, wasn't one to shy away from confrontation. "You pay the mortgage, right? It's your house. You should tell them to back off. If it were me, I'd call the cops on them." Tom considered it. He really did. But calling the police on his neighbors felt like a step too far. What if things got ugly? Tom wasn't looking to create conflict. He simply wanted his privacy to be respected. There had to be a better way to communicate his feelings, one that wouldn't escalate the situation into an outright feud. But on yet another sweltering Saturday afternoon, his patience finally ran out, and his frustration reached its limit. He had just returned from a long day running errands, arms full of groceries, when he heard the unmistakable sound of laughter and splashing coming from his backyard. He groaned. Not again. Sure enough, there they were, Miguel Mendez, Linda, their 2 teenage sons, and a group of friends happily splashing around in his pool as if they owned the place. A portable speaker blasted music, and half-empty beer bottles littered the pool deck. Tom stood frozen in his kitchen for a moment, the grocery bag slipping from his hands as the anger rose inside him like a slow boiling wave. He couldn't take it anymore. That night, as he sat alone in his living room, the distant sound of laughter still coming from the pool area, Tom began to plan. He didn't want a confrontation. No, he was tired of talking. He needed something more dramatic, something that would send a clear message, one they couldn't ignore. Tom, ever the perfectionist, spent the night diving into online articles about pool chemicals, water care, and safety protocols. His goal wasn't to harm anyone, but to cause just enough disruption to make the pool temporarily unusable. He educated himself on pH levels, chlorine concentrations, and a process called superchlorination, which could turn the water cloudy and undrinkable for several days. That's when inspiration struck. A harmless prank that would make the pool appear hazardous while remaining completely safe. The formula he envisioned was dramatic. Thick, foamy bubbles resembling a chemical reaction that would surely scare off any unwelcome visitors. He smiled to himself. It was perfect. A true, ultimate revenge. The following weekend, Tom was ready. The day started like any other, with Miguel and his crew showing up uninvited around noon. By now, it was a routine. Tom watched from his window as they lounged by the pool, flipping burgers on a portable grill they had dragged over without asking. As the sun began to set, Tom made his move. He casually walked out to his shed, pretending to search for something, though in reality he was grabbing the blue bowl he had filled with a mixture of chemicals earlier that day. The concoction was harmless, but it was designed to create a thick, foamy layer on the surface of the pool, making it look as though something had gone horribly wrong with the water. With the bowl in hand, Tom sauntered over to the pool, maintaining an air of nonchalance that ensured no one paid him any attention, until he arrived at the water's edge. His heart raced as he tipped the bowl into the water, watching as the mixture began to spread. At first, nothing happened, but within minutes, the pool started to transform. The clear blue water became cloudy, thick bubbles foaming on the surface. Soon, steam began to rise from the water, giving the appearance of a chemical reaction. "What the hell is that?" Miguel yelled, jumping up from his lounge chair, eyes wide as he watched the pool froth and churn. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. The guests gathered around, staring in horror at the thick white foam that was quickly covering the entire pool. Tom took a step back, folding his arms with a look of feigned concern. "Looks like a chemical imbalance," he remarked, shaking his head slowly. "Might be dangerous. You should probably avoid the water for a bit." Miguel's expression shifted between shock and suspicion. He cast a wary glance at Tom, as though trying to determine if this was some kind of joke, but there was nothing he could say in response. The pool was obviously unusable, and there was no way he could prove Tom had done anything. The guests hurriedly gathered their belongings and left, muttering complaints as they went. Miguel stood by the pool for a moment longer, glaring at the foamy water before storming off without a word. For the next week, Tom enjoyed the peace and quiet he had craved for so long. The pool remained untouched, the once blue water still clouded with the aftermath of his chemical trick. The neighbors stayed away, unsure of what exactly had happened, but wary enough to leave Tom and his pool alone. But Tom knew it wouldn't last forever. Miguel wasn't the type to let something like this go easily. As expected, the following weekend, Miguel appeared at Tom's front door, arms crossed and his jaw tight with frustration. "You did something to that pool," Miguel accused, his voice low but loaded with suspicion. Tom maintained a calm, neutral expression, feigning confusion. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," he replied evenly. "It's just pool maintenance, Miguel. You know, these things happen. I'm just trying to take care of my property." Miguel stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether to press the issue further. But what could he do? He had no proof, and there was no way to force Tom to let them use the pool again. Finally, Miguel shook his head and walked away without another word. Tom watched him go, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He had won. In the weeks that followed, Tom's backyard returned to the peaceful haven it had once been. The neighbors, clearly spooked by the pool incident, stopped treating it like a community amenity. The teenagers stopped sneaking in, and Miguel and his friends no longer lounged on his patio without permission. For the first time in months, Tom felt a sense of peace, as if his home truly belonged to him again. However, as the days went by, he realized he didn't want to completely shut himself off from his neighbors. Despite the chaos caused by Miguel and his family, Tom wasn't the type to hold a grudge. All he really wanted was respect and clear boundaries. A month after the incident, Tom decided to make amends. He organized a small barbecue and invited a few neighbors over to enjoy burgers and drinks together. He made it clear that the pool was still off limits unless permission was given, but he hoped that by inviting them into his space on his own terms, they would start to understand the importance of respecting his boundaries. Surprisingly, Miguel showed up. He wasn't as loud and arrogant as before. In fact, he seemed almost sheepish, offering a half-hearted apology for the way things had gotten out of hand. "Look, man," Miguel began, his tone sincere as they stood next to the grill. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. We just got a little too comfortable, I guess." Tom nodded, his expression softening. "I understand," he replied. "But this is my place. I've worked hard for it, and I need you guys to respect that." Miguel nodded in return, and while they weren't exactly friends, there was an understanding between them. The tension that had once filled the air between them began to fade. After that barbecue, where Tom had laid down the rules about the pool, Miguel seemed to have changed. There were no more unannounced visits, no loud parties by the pool, and even the teenagers in the neighborhood had stopped sneaking in. But more than that, Miguel started waving to Tom in the mornings and stopping by for casual conversations. One Saturday afternoon, Tom was in the backyard trimming the hedges near the pool when Miguel came over to the fence with a couple of beers. "Hey, you got a minute?" Miguel asked, holding out a cold bottle. Tom hesitated but then nodded. "Sure." The two men sat by the pool, sipping their drinks and making small talk. Miguel opened up about how things had been tough for him lately. Work stress, trying to keep his family happy and struggling with bills. As Tom listened, he began to see Miguel in a new light. Beneath his relaxed, carefree demeanor was someone dealing with personal struggles. For years, Tom had seen Miguel as the inconsiderate neighbor who ignored boundaries. But now, sitting together by the pool, Miguel appeared more vulnerable, more human. Miguel's gaze rested on the pool, its water now clear and inviting once again. "I didn't mean to take advantage of you, Tom," Miguel admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I guess I don't know. I felt like you had this great life, and I wanted to be part of it. But I didn't realize I was crossing the line." Tom nodded thoughtfully, understanding finally beginning to replace frustration. "I get it, but you gotta understand that this is my space. I worked for it, and I need to protect it. I'm not saying you can't ever come over, but it has to be on my terms, you know?" Miguel smiled sheepishly. "I understand now. Yeah, I understand now. Thanks for not calling the cops on us." The two men laughed, and for the first time, Tom felt like maybe things could change for the better. He didn't need to be best friends with Miguel, But at least now there was a level of mutual respect that hadn't been there before. Just when it seemed like everything had finally calmed down, Tom began to notice odd occurrences around the pool again. It started with minor things, small disruptions, like the pool cover being slightly askew, or a few wet footprints on the patio in the mornings, even though he was certain no one had been swimming. Tom's initial suspicion was that the neighborhood kids were up to their old tricks once more. But after asking around, he learned that the Mendez boys were spending most of their summer at a camp out of town. Miguel, too, had been unusually busy at work. So, if it wasn't the Mendez family, who was it? One evening, Tom decided to stay up late and keep an eye on the backyard. He turned off all the lights in the house, made a cup of coffee, and sat near the back door with a view of the pool. Hours passed, and just as he was about to give up and go to bed, he heard something. A splash. Tom froze. Slowly, he crept to the windows and peeked outside. Under the dim moonlight, he saw a figure standing by the edge of the pool, quietly slipping into the water. Tom's heart raced. Who could it be? Was it yet another neighbor exploiting his generosity, or something far more unsettling? Clutching his phone tightly, Tom cautiously stepped outside and switched on the patio lights, their glow spilling over the pool area. "Hey, who's there?" he called, his voice firm but betraying a hint of unease. The figure in the pool froze, startled by the sudden illumination. As Tom drew nearer, his breath caught. It wasn't a teenager, nor was it an intruder. What he saw left him stunned. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, shivering in the water. "Who are you?" Tom asked, lowering his voice. The woman looked up at him, eyes wide with fear and embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. I just didn't know where else to go." Confused, Tom stood by the edge of the pool. "What do you mean? You can't just break into someone's yard like this." She hesitated, clearly embarrassed but desperate. I'm staying with my aunt down the street. I didn't want to bother her, and I saw your pool. I didn't think anyone would notice." Tom let out a heavy sigh. You can't just sneak into people's backyards, especially at night. It's dangerous. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone firm but not unkind. The woman hesitated before explaining that she had recently moved in with her aunt after escaping an abusive relationship. She admitted that she didn't have many friends or safe places to go and had seen the pool as a quiet refuge, a spot where she could clear her thoughts and find a moment of peace. She didn't mean to intrude, but she didn't know where else to turn. Tom found himself in an unexpected dilemma. On one hand, he couldn't just let people keep using his pool without permission. On the other hand, this young woman seemed genuinely lost and in need of help. His first instinct was to tell her to leave and never come back, but something stopped him. "I get it," he said after a long pause, "but you can't keep sneaking in here. If you need a place to clear your head, just ask. I'm not a monster. I'll let you use the pool if I'm around." The woman's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you. I won't be a bother, I promise." From that day on, Tom would occasionally spot her coming over in the afternoons. She always made sure to ask permission first, and took care to leave the pool area exactly as she found it. Gradually, Tom came to understand that his pool had evolved into more than just his personal retreat. It had become a sanctuary for others as well. As this realization sank in, he began to question whether his insistence on keeping the pool exclusively his had been a bit too strict. While he didn't regret establishing boundaries, he started to wonder if there was space in his life to be a little more generous and open-hearted toward those who truly needed it. Just when Tom thought everything had finally settled down, a new surprise arose. One evening, while he was grilling in his backyard, he noticed a flyer stuck to his front door. It was from the local homeowners association, announcing a community meeting about a new initiative, a public pool project. Tom's stomach dropped as he read the details. Apparently, several neighbors had petitioned to have a public pool built nearby. They argued that the community needed a shared space for summer activities, and that residents shouldn't have to travel to the next town just to enjoy some water during the hot months. As Tom read further, he discovered that the petition had been spearheaded by none other than Miguel Mendez. Anger boiling over, Tom grabbed the flyer and marched straight to Miguel's house. When Miguel answered the door, Tom thrust the flyer toward him. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp with frustration. Miguel simply shrugged, his demeanor calm and unapologetic. "It's a petition," he said nonchalantly. "What about it?" "It's just a community project, Tom. You've got your own pool, so I didn't think you'd care." "Of course I care. You think this is going to fix things? People will still come to my pool, even if there's a public one down the street." Miguel sighed, as if all this were a misunderstanding. "Come on, man. The public pool will take the pressure off you. Nobody will need to use yours anymore. Isn't that what you want?" Tom stood there speechless. He had spent so much time fighting to keep his pool private, and now Miguel was suggesting that a public pool would somehow make his life easier. But as Tom thought about it, he realized Miguel might be right. Maybe a public pool would keep the kids and neighbors from feeling entitled to his property. Maybe it would create a better balance. At first, the idea didn't sit well with him, but the more Tom thought about it, the less it seemed like such a bad option. The public pool project took months to navigate through approvals, each step requiring patience and persistence. When it was finally greenlit, Tom felt an unexpected wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't the ideal solution, but it was a compromise he could live with. And, in some ways, it felt like progress. Over the next year, as construction began on the new community pool, Tom noticed fewer and fewer disturbances at his home. The teenagers stopped coming around, and Miguel's family became less interested in hanging out by his pool. By the time the public pool opened, Tom's backyard had truly become his own private oasis again. Occasionally, he would invite the young woman from down the street or a few close friends over for a swim, but the days of loud parties and uninvited guests were over. Tom had won back his peace, but he had also learned something along the way. Sometimes, protecting what's yours requires setting boundaries, but other times, it's about finding ways to share with the right people on your own terms. Tom found a balance between privacy and community, and for the first time in years he could truly relax, knowing that his pool and his life were finally under control. Did you enjoy this story? What about you? Do you think it is okay to use someone's pool without permission? If you were in Tom's shoes, would you have called the police? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Tom found a balance between privacy and social life, finally managing to relax after a long time. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.